This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. This episode is sponsored by C School, the online school for creativity training. If you'd like to unleash your creative potential and access a free Creativity Blueprint training series, then just head over to c.school. That's www.c.school for your free training series. In this episode, I speak with Andy Molinsky, and we talk about stepping outside of your comfort zone, imposter syndrome, and getting over a fear of public speaking. Enjoy this episode. Hi, it's James Taylor. I'm delighted today to be joined by Andy Molinsky. Andy Molinsky is a professor of organizational behavior and psychology at Brandeis University. He regularly writes for the Harvard Business Review and Inc., and his work has been featured in The Economist, Fast Company, Fortune, the New York Times, and NPR. His first book, Global Dexterity, has been used widely in organizations around the world, including Boeing, AIG, the US Air Force Academy, and the Clinton Foundation, amongst others. His new book, Reach with Penguin Random House, is about acting outside your comfort zone, why it's so hard, how we avoid doing it, and how to be more successful at it. It's my great pleasure to have Andy with us today. So welcome, Andy.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So share with everyone what's going on in your world just now.
Right now, it's a Monday, beginning of the week, and I'm always happy at the beginning of the week. I like to kind of kick off the work week. So things are good.
And you've been getting. I was reading some of the reviews earlier today about the kind of acclaim that the book's been getting. It seems to have really kind of hit a nerve that you're seeing some great reviews there for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a topic that getting out of your comfort zone is it's clearly a topic sort of in the zeitgeist. You know, people think about it, people talk about it, people create memes about it. I was actually talking this morning with someone at a company, and she was saying that we all want our people to be able to step outside their comfort zones. We just kind of don't know how to help them, as opposed to just telling them to do it. And so all these reasons were the reasons that I wanted to write this book. You know, hopefully it's a smart book, but it's a super user-friendly book. But yeah, no, it's been getting some nice feedback, and that's of course always gratifying to hear. And
it's interesting. I think it was just recently for the Nobel Prize. There was the gentleman that wrote the book Nudge. He won the prize recently as well. So it seems to be this idea of psychology in organizations is kind of making a bit of a kind of coming back up again as well. And I wonder is that because we hear so much now about artificial intelligence and technology transforming, that it's like, well, there's a human that has to deal with all this at the end of it, and the transformation of work and what work actually means.
That could be. It's I think also I think the advent of behavioral economics has really transformed the way that people write and think about companies and organizations. You know, in the olden days, the sort of economic perspective was that of the rational man. You know, sort of that like everyone's rational and we can base all our ideas and theories off that. And in this field of behavioral economics, which essentially, you know, now I'm actually a psychologist talking here, but essentially is basically borrowing many concepts from psychology, integrating them into economic thinking, and sort of debunking a lot of the sort of traditional rational ways of thinking. And that sort of caught hold with some books and perspectives, and I think that's now in some ways the new normal, that psychology plays a key role, and that's good. I mean, I think that's important to understand. You know, that we often talk about like our human resources or our talent. You know, but you know, those are people,
yeah.
Right? So
where did it all begin for you? Where did you kind of first kind of develop this interest, this love of the kind of area that you're talking about now, which kind of organizational behavior?
Oh gosh, in terms of organizational behavior itself, I think my story in terms of how I became interested in it really comes from life experience. When I was in college, I studied international relations, and I studied some different languages, and I was always interested in international types of things and global types of things. But that was a long time ago, and I lived abroad a couple of times, and it was my second time living abroad where I started keeping a diary of all the, I don't know, at this point, really organizational behavior insights that I had. It was just purely maybe I was bored at my job. I don't know what it was, but it was like I was keeping these notes about all the dynamics I was seeing in the office, and a lot of the cross-cultural dynamics and so on and so forth. And this was a long time ago. This is before, certainly, there probably was email, but not too many people were doing it. It was right when the fax machine came into vogue. And I was trying to, when I came back to the U.S., I was in France at the time. When I came back to the U.S., I was trying to figure out, what this interest was. What is this about? Clearly there was something about psychology. I was interested in, how groups were interacting and how people were adapting and switching their behavior, and how culture was playing a role, and so on. And I discovered from talking to a lot of people that all of this kind of lived in the umbrella of organizational behavior, and really this sort of the applied psychology in organizational behavior. And that really inspired me to go off and get a PhD and to do a doctorate in the field, and to learn to be a researcher and a professor. And from there, I've always, I think perhaps it's because my interests stem from my real world experiences, that I've always wanted to then go back and make an impact in the quote unquote real world. And so that's, I think, what brings me full circle to having done a PhD, have a research career, a teaching career, but in addition now really stepping out and I work in companies and do keynotes and workshops and write books for popular audiences.
So I was watching on a flight recently. I was watching Billions, the TV show Billions, and in that company. So it's a hedge fund. If people don't know the series, it's a hedge fund company, and they actually have a psychologist that's one of the team members that sits down with each of the team members each week, and they kind of go through their behavior. And I noticed as part of that, they were kind of talking about some things like what you would class as kind of avoidance tendencies, why they weren't doing certain trades at certain points and what was holding them back at certain things. So in your book, you talk about these 5 key challenges which kind of underlie those avoidance tendencies that we all have, at different points in what we're doing. Can you give us maybe a kind of top line, an outline of what those things are?
Yeah, and I have to check out that show. That's on. What can I ask you what network it's on?
I think it's on Showtime in the US. I seem to actually it could be on even Netflix, but I think it's possibly Showtime.
All right, I'll have to check that out. I love I love shows like that, so I'll have to check that out. Avoidance tendencies. Yeah, so for my book, I'll tell you that I interviewed all sorts of people, by the way, just to set the context: managers, executives, entrepreneurs, small business owners, but also, I sort of expanded the scope to doctors, police officers, actors, students, priests, rabbis, even a goat farmer, and all sorts of situations too that people were considering was stepping outside their comfort zone. So everything from networking and pitching and promoting yourself, to public speaking, to making small talk with people you don't know, to making a sale, to delivering bad news, all sorts of things. So just to set the stage. So in terms of avoidance, I think top line, we're really good at avoiding, and we're very creative at avoiding. So, people did all sorts of things. The obvious is simply saying no. And that really resonated with me. It was interesting, the amount of sort of seemingly confident, or at least from the outside, confident professionals avoiding by saying no to things, which is exactly, by the way, what I did at the very beginning of my career, like 20 years ago, and I was presented with speaking opportunities in companies, and I would say no. I would often lie and say, oh gosh, that day doesn't work for me, pleading and hoping to myself that they wouldn't then say, oh, we're flexible, Yeah. but so that's the obvious one. There's some less obvious ones though too. Sometimes people did only part of a task. Maybe deliver only part of the negative news they need to deliver, for example. Maybe they would substitute sort of call it like imperfect substitution, sort of like like let's say you're a small business owner and you're very uncomfortable going to a networking event to meet people and potentially pitch your company, and you say to yourself, you know what, it's not that important that I do that. I'll just send an email blast, or I'll just post on Facebook, or whatever your social platform is. And there's nothing wrong with doing those things, but they're not quite a substitute. And the reality is that you're probably avoiding. People procrastinate, people pass the buck and have someone else do it, and people often rationalize, as I said before, saying, for example, it's not that important that I, learn to speak in public. It's not that important that I, am able to step into a room in front of some venture capitalists and kind of advocate for them investing in my firm. It's not that important that I do that. Someone else can do that, or I can learn to do that over time. And the reality is that when something's outside our comfort zone, it's self-threatening, it's uncomfortable, and we could talk about that. But there's a good reason people avoid it. It brings a tremendous short-term relief, right?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned like the one, like the speaking, speaking on stage, and someone said to me recently, they were talking about why so many people don't like speaking on stage. He said, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, standing up in the middle of in the Serengeti in the field with no protection, nothing, no weapon or anything. You're basically just standing there, clear, open, lots of light on you. It's like, from an evolutionary perspective, it's like the worst thing you could possibly do. So, they wonder, is that part of the brain just kind of kicking into gear, perhaps?
That's funny. I guess so. I guess so. It's some sort of like core, fight, flight, danger type of reaction, maybe, that you're visible. I think it's as we've evolved and as we make sense of the situations that we're in, I think people worry that they'll, which is probably not quite the same core fear of being, visible and attacked, but, like the idea of being seen as a fraud.
Yeah. Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome, or being embarrassed or ashamed, as a result of that, or as a result of just simply, losing your words, or being overtaken by the power of the moment, the power of the crowd, the power of the audience, the power of the scene. You know what I mean? I think it's a terrifying thing to do. And I've written a lot about public speaking. I've basically come from a point where in university I was terrified to speak in class. I never did. To now I do it for a living. I gave a TED talk a couple months ago. I'm a professor. I speak all the time, and I give a lot of keynotes and so on, and I do it all the time. So
if someone's maybe there, and it could be maybe that they're worried about getting up on stage, whether that's to be a speaker or as an artist, a musician, kind of getting up on stage, or the one I hear often, even more, I would say from a lot of creative folks, is the actually selling your work, and they create lots of ways to avoid having to have those conversations about kind of selling or kind of marketing directly their work. What are some things that they could be doing for themselves to help them kind of begin stepping out of that comfort zone?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I get it with creative work. I have the same problem myself. And with creative work, oftentimes what you're creating, you might identify with it personally more than something that's more mass produced, for example. And so if it's a unique piece of art or something that's truly unique that you've put yourself into and that you've been working on for a long time, and it's been yours and you created and it comes from you, and then all of a sudden to sell it to someone, it's oftentimes creative people really care who they sell it to, right?
Yeah.
That they're going to be a caretaker for this item. I think that I think there are a lot of things, and I would apply a lot of the tools that I talk about in my book to that situation. So the first thing I would suggest is to understand what your pain point is, like what's behind your reluctance to sell. What exactly is it? Do you feel like in that moment when you're kind of making that pitch, it feels inauthentic to you? Do you feel like you're kind of like a someone selling, snake oil? And do you feel like is it sleazy to sell something? Do you worry that you won't be liked? Do you worry you won't be good at it? Do you feel resentful you have to do it in the first place? You wish you just could not have to sell on some level? Do you feel it's wrong in some ways? I guess that's not really relevant to selling, but try to find your pain point. What exactly is it? Then I would say to discover your source of conviction. So, I mean, if you're thinking of doing it, there must be a reason. What's that reason? What's that purpose? What's your quote unquote why? What's your reason why? Is it a professional reason? Is it really important for you professionally to sell whatever it might be? And if so, what's that about? Why is that really important to you? Is it important for you personally? Maybe you're supporting your family, and that's really valuable to you. Maybe you're sending your child to school. The money is critical, or whatever. I mean, finding your source of conviction is very different for different situations, different for different people. It could be personal, it could be professional. Whatever it is, really kind of pause and find it, locate it, embrace it, use it, and that's really important because that'll give that wind at your back to take that leap. Because when you do, and by the way, that's not the only tool I would recommend. I have a few others, but I do want to say that once you're able to try something that is outside your comfort zone, you might be surprised that you might feel less bad than you think, and you actually might be better at it than you think. But you can only discover that if you try it. So
that conviction thing, I also sense there what you were saying is kind of finding the emotional core of that. So rather than being an intellectual construct of I have to do this in order to do this, to get this other thing, or to sell it, or to make the rent, or whatever the thing is, you actually have to really kind of dig a little bit deeper than that, and actually find a core emotional side that is going to maybe help offset the other parts of you that are trying to add those kind of avoidance tendencies.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it is I think the emotions are ultimately what's holding you back. So I think you need an antidote that has similar emotions, but in an approach as opposed to an avoid sort of trajectory. In a way.
Yeah. I've heard some people that quite shy people, and they've been told to in order to kind of make friends and do things like that, just to do very simple little things, like every day try and go and introduce yourself to one new person. Just these kind of little baby steps. Is that a good way of doing it, to try to kind of chunk it down in some way to find that first step and kind of gradually kind of move out of that comfort zone?
So that's a great segue actually to the second sort of tool I would recommend, which is, so if conviction is finding your sense of purpose, and really using it to your advantage. The second sort of key tool is what I call customization, and that's your chunking, that's your baby steps, that's your goal. You said you kind of use the example of setting a goal, but what I found is that when stepping outside your comfort zone, you have more power than you think to make a situation your own, to put your own twist on it, to kind of tweak it in your own way. And there were a lot of ways that I found people did that, whether it was through their language, how they talked, maybe their body language, through. Sometimes people played with the timing of the event a little bit. Like, in other words, if it was a loud, noisy, intimidating networking event, maybe they go a little early, because if they go early, it's less loud, less noisy, less intimidating. So they're kind of customizing it to their liking. Some people would bring props, wear that power suit, wear that lucky ring. And actually, in terms of your question about shy people, I have a great story that someone emailed me after reading my book, Reach. She was taken by the book, and in particular this piece on customization. And she said she was shy, and she had a really hard time, meeting people at parties, social situations. But she wanted to, and so she happened to like photography. And she had this epiphany that she could bring a selfie stick to parties, and so she did, and people would come up to her and ask her what it was, and she'd say, "Oh, it's a selfie stick." And like, most everyone had heard of a selfie stick, but not everyone knew what it looked like or how to use it. And so she would say, "Oh yeah, here, let me see your cell phone." and she would show them, and then they'd say, "Oh, is that how you do it?" And then they'd say, "Oh, let's take a picture." And you can see, by the way, already as I'm describing this, it is very different from what it used to be, right?
Yeah.
In her, so it was just a brilliant little move, and that's what I mean by customization. It's just a little example, but so it's very, very powerful. You have more power than you think to kind of make a situation your own.
So in this kind of journey you've had, as I know you initially kind of starting more in the business world than the kind of academic world, and now you're obviously known for your books, which read a kind of a mass audience as well. But can you tell us maybe about a time you worked on something creatively in your own the work that you do, and you gave it your heart and your soul, but it just didn't work out like you'd hoped? And more importantly, what were the lessons that you took from that experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the experience that I had. So I kind of wear two hats really. The first hat is my sort of traditional academic hat, and then the second hat really is this hat where I've reached out to write for broad audiences and do consulting and so on. I would say there've been many times in each side of my experience where I've kind of failed in creating something. But I think what pops to my head, the first thing that sort of entered my head when you mentioned that was early on in my academic career, trying to write academic papers, which are creative enterprises, really, and failing, and really like the failure is pretty clear, you know, when you're producing something like a piece of art. Maybe I don't know what the indicator of failure might be.
It's very subjective, I guess. When when you're writing a book like the move of an academic audience, the peer review is such a critical thing.
Yeah, and you submit. Exactly. Yeah, it's like you submit it for peer review, and you get a review back. You get a 7-page single-spaced review back about why it's so bad, and why, like detailing in like the most intimate, you know, thorough detail.
That must be great for your confidence. Yeah, getting that.
Yeah, so that's rough, right? That's rough, especially when you're standing in your profession, and your potential for continuing in your profession is really contingent on you're actually succeeding. You know, you can't continue to be a professor early on if you don't have some of these successes. So it's a real blow to everything. It shakes your world, really. So
what did you take away from that? You were getting all this criticism, and it's some of it obviously valid because you needed to kind of improve and everything. But what did you use? What did you use this information for? How did you kind of find a way to kind of deal with it and turn it to your advantage?
So, you know, it's interesting. Now. So the version of me now, I think, would approach it differently than the version of me back then. You know, the version of me now would try my darndest to see the critique is data. You know, this is actually a blessing in disguise, or there's a silver lining here. This is data. I got 3 incredibly smart people to read in very close detail what I did and give me a tremendous amount of data about how I can improve it. Like what better product testing could there be, kind of thing, right? Yeah. You know, like now that's me now. Me back then was, you know, I think that more emotional, you know, because I'm starting to feel, I felt incredibly discouraged, frustrated. I think a lot of people feel defensive, you know, oh, they don't really get it, you know, and so on and so forth. But I think what helped me is that I guess it's really my sense of purpose, really what I was talking about before, that I had a drive that I wanted to be able to figure this out, and I desperately wanted to succeed professionally in my field, in be known, and I thought that I had some good ideas, and I had an advisor in graduate school who thought I had good ideas, and he was well respected and so on. So even though I you know, it was clear I didn't execute well, I had to figure this out, and so I tried to find people who, out of the goodness of their heart, would sit down with me and kind of like detail and in detail show me where I went wrong and how I might be able to turn this around. I remember very well one year at a conference. This was in Colorado because I remember it so well. In Denver, meeting someone who I did not know. A friend introduced me to him. I was trying to network to try to find the right person to give me the feedback, and I sat down with him, and he showed me. He looked at the reviews, he looked at the paper, and he basically he gave me an annotated example, like point by point. He started showing me the paper. Up, here's a mistake you made here. Up, you're showing that you're a novice right here. Up, look what you did here. This is the wrong way to do this. And like all he needed to do was for a single page to show me all these problems. And it completely opened my eyes. And then I worked hard on it. I tried to get other people again, sort of in my network to give me feedback and so on. And so I think I strategized. I relied on my sense of purpose. I customized, as I talked about before, by essentially kind of creating a makeshift support structure for myself. And in the end, by the way, this is a positive story. It's this paper was published, and it was not only published but published in one of the very top journals in my field. I got a lot of acclaim for it, and it spurred me to write my first book.
So that journey that you took, obviously, that could have crushed a lot of other academics. They might just, okay, I'm just gonna change field or do something else as well. So you obviously continue. You found that kind of mentor that was able to help you do that. I see a lot of great academics. I just saw this the other day where someone was talking about the book In Search of Excellence, Peter's, on the management side of things. But what they often don't say about that book is there was another gentleman who wrote a book basically on exactly the same thing around about the same time. And they actually collaborated, and he wrote a book on the art of Japanese management, because when a lot of Japanese management techniques were coming in as well. But the gentleman who wrote the book it was very academic in terms of, and it was a great book, but very academic. And Peters came along and wrote a book which was for a mass, a large appeal, a general audience as well. And I wondered, obviously, Peter's gone on to get great acclaim and gets booked for all the big speaking gigs and all the big consulting gigs as well now. And I wonder, in the academic world, is there a little bit of a war between those that write and publish for a more general audience and those that primarily are writing for their own peers and for the development of their of the topic that they write and they teach about?
I think so. I mean, I think it's probably more complicated than sort of two sides. I think there's many perspectives on that topic. There's certainly people out there who would wonder why someone would waste their time doing something like that, writing a general audience book. And then there are other people on the other part of the spectrum who might say, why spend my time working on an academic paper that will only be viewed by a very narrow set of people when I could reach and impact and influence so many people? And then there are people in the middle who might say, I think that academics and popular audiences are both worthy audiences to reach, and in that in a career you can do both. But maybe it's an issue of sequencing. Maybe it makes sense to do the sort of rigorous peer-reviewed academic work, contribute to the academic discipline, and then use your work and others' work to try to write something that can help the general public benefit from that knowledge, and so that ends up being kind of a package. There's an academic side and a sort of public side, and frankly, that's actually my perspective, my personal perspective. For both of my books, I've published academic articles in really top journals in my field, in those areas. But I think what maybe distinguishes me, but I'm not the only one. There are plenty of people now in academics, especially who work in business schools, who see their mission as not simply writing for other academics, but to also influence the world of practice. And so I think that's really important, and I feel it's worth my time to do it. And I think there's just sort of judged by the amount of business books written by people who are academics now.
Yeah.
I think a lot of other people agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were talking about writing. Do you have an online resource or a tool or an app like Evernote, for example, that really going to help? Because you're obviously having to absorb lots of data, lots from different things, kind of absorb that, think about that, and then create and write as well. Is there one tool or maybe a couple of tools that you really love to use?
Microsoft Word. I don't. I'm just kidding. No, I don't actually. I don't have any tools, but I'd be interested in hearing about them. I don't use anything other than simply Microsoft Word. That's it.
And how do you, when you're collating all this information from different places, obviously you're doing your primary research, interviewing people, but then you're also maybe seeing things out there online. You're seeing other things. Is there any way that how do you kind of collate and make sense of all that information?
Folders in my computer. I mean, I'm a little old school maybe,
but it works.
I just literally, yeah, folders in my computer about different topics. No, I am not I'm not a fancy guy in that way. I just sort of I just keep it in a reasonable order, and I when I'm interested in a topic, I really think about it all the time, and I do get immersed in it, and I think that helps you bring those connections together. But that's not technology. That's more psychology.
And if you could we're talking about books, obviously, and we're gonna have a link here to reach, so people can learn more about that and help them identify their own avoidance tendencies, and then help kind of step out outside their comfort zone. But is there one other book that you would recommend to our listeners, maybe if they're interested in this area that you write about and you speak about, or maybe something completely different, and also maybe one album or record that you would recommend?
Well, books, I would say there's a book that I really like called Difficult Conversations, which it's one of the books that I think inspired me in my writing on Reach. It's a book about how to have difficult conversations and some of the sort of underlying psychology of difficult conversations. So I really like that book. I think it's written by Doug Stone and Sheila Heen. So that's one I'd recommend for sure. And if this were a video chat, and if I were in my office, which I'm not right now, I could show you my copy, which looks almost like I've eaten it. It's got some
it's well worn.
Well-worn copy. So that's for sure. Album. I don't know if I'm the right person here. I feel like I've put some of my music tastes on hold to indulge my children in their musical tastes.
So you're listening to lots of Disney at the moment, then, I'm guessing.
No, they're older than Disney. Pop sort of pop stuff. But I listen to a lot of classical music. Now, it's interesting. I'm not a music expert. I couldn't tell you, oh gosh, you've got to get this album or that album, but I listen constantly to classical music as I work.
And do you listen to that on an app like Spotify, or do you just, is it on some like Pandora? How do you kind of find and listen to that music?
Apple Music, and I use Apple Music, and also I listen to our local Boston classical music station, which I really like.
Great.
So that's just streaming online. So I'm constantly, like, after we hang up here, I will be doing that. That's just it's like the soundtrack of my mind.
I will put all these links here on the show notes as well. Final question for you, Andy. Let's imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So you have all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge that you've acquired over the years in your field, but no one knows you. You know no one. You have to restart. What would you do? How would you restart?
Well, I guess it would depend on which aspect. Are we talking sort of my academic career or my sort of outside of academic?
It could be either. I'll let you choose.
So the question is what would I do if I had to start all over again?
Yeah.
I think I would probably do what I've always had the instinct to do, which is to start with by talking with people about the people I want to help ultimately, and to try to really understand what their challenges are, what their pain points are, and I think that by understanding that and understanding from their perspective, from their point of view, what is it that they struggle with? I think you're going to have a much easier hill to climb, whether you're then trying to address and solve some of their problems from an academic perspective or from a practical perspective. But I think starting from the phenomenon, starting from the actual challenge, is the very best way to go.
Great. We're going to have a link here for Reach, which is out now on Penguin Random House. If people want to continue this conversation, where's the best place for them to go to find out more about your writing and your other things that you have on the go just now?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's www.andymolinsky.com, ANDYMOLINSKY.com. And like when I created that website, I wanted it to be the kind of website I would want to visit. So you'll have to judge if you like it or not. But it's got lots of articles and so I write for various places like Harvard Business Review and Inc.com and so on, and it's got quizzes and lots of videos, and I've got a YouTube channel with all sorts of videos, and I have a newsletter that I send to my subscribers with some of my kind of best tips and so on, and so I encourage you to check it out. I also have links, of course, to my social media there. I do a lot of LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook, and I would love to connect with people. So please come find me.
Fantastic. Andy Molinsky, thanks for sharing us and giving us an insight into your creative life, and I wish you all the best in your future work.
Thank you. It was great talking with you.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.